the Japanese soldier who kept fighting World War II for 29 years. Hiroo Onoda'S unbelievable story, the dense, humid jungle of Lubang Island, Philippines, March 9, 1974. The air is thick with the scent of tropical vegetation and the distant calls of exotic birds. Suddenly, the undergrowth rustles, and a lone figure emerges from the shadows. His uniform, once crisp and proud, now hangs in tatters from his lean frame. This is Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda, a man out of time, a soldier who has been fighting a war that ended 29 years ago. As Onoda'S steps into the clearing, his eyes, sharp and wary from decades of vigilance, scan the surroundings. His weather-beaten face bears the marks of countless days under the unforgiving tropical sun. In his hands, he clutches his trusted Arisaka Type 99 rifle, a weapon that has been his constant companion for nearly 3 decades. Little does he know that he's about to face a truth that will shake the very foundations of his existence and challenge everything he has believed for the past 29 years. To understand Onoda'S extraordinary story, we must first journey back in time, to the tumultuous days of World War II. The global conflict had reshaped the world's landscape, redrawing borders and reshaping alliances. Nations across continents had been engulfed in a struggle that would leave an indelible mark on history. But for one man, the war would persist long after the rest of the world had moved on. Our story truly begins in December 1944. The tide of the war in the Pacific was turning decisively against Imperial Japan. Allied forces, led by the United States, were island-hopping their way towards the Japanese mainland, each victory bringing them closer to Tokyo. It was in this context of impending defeat that Hiroo Onoda, a young intelligence officer in the Imperial Japanese Army, received his final orders. Onoda, then just 22 years old, stood at attention before Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. The Major's words were clear and unambiguous. Hold the island until the Imperial armies return. Never surrender. Never take your own life. These words, spoken with the gravity of a nation facing existential threat, would echo in Onoda'S mind for nearly 3 decades, shaping his actions and his very reality in ways that neither man could have possibly imagined at the time. Born in 1922 in the village of Kamekawa, Wakayama Prefecture, Onoda had been raised in a Japan that was already embracing militarism. From a young age, he was imbued with the values of absolute loyalty to the emperor and the belief in Japan's divine right to rule Asia. These beliefs, coupled with the strict military training he received, would form the bedrock of his unwavering dedication to duty. As Allied forces advanced across the Pacific, Onoda was dispatched to Lubang Island, a small but strategically located island in the Philippines. His mission was to conduct guerrilla warfare and gather intelligence. Along with a small group of soldiers, Onoda was tasked with destroying the airstrip and pier at the harbor if the Americans invaded. When American troops landed on Lubang in February 1945, Onoda and his men retreated into the mountains. They watched from hidden vantage points as the island fell to Allied control. But in their minds, this was just a temporary setback. They firmly believed that the Japanese forces would soon return in force, driving out the invaders and reclaiming their territory. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The world moved on, but in the jungles of Lubang, time stood still for Onoda and his companions. They continued to carry out their mission, conducting guerrilla operations against the local population, whom they saw as enemy collaborators. They lived off the land, occasionally raiding local farms for supplies, all the while waiting for the reinforcements they were certain would come. If you're captivated by this extraordinary tale of dedication and isolation, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most compelling stories from history, unearthing the human experiences behind world-changing events. Don't miss out on more incredible narratives that challenge our understanding of the past and present. As the years passed, Onoda'S group gradually dwindled. In 1950, one of the soldiers, Yuichi Akatsu, grew weary of the hardship and surrendered to Filipino authorities. Onoda and the others dismissed this as a clever ruse by the enemy to demoralize them. They doubled down on their vigilance, convinced more than ever that the war was still raging beyond their jungle domain. For years later, in 1954, tragedy struck the group. During a skirmish with local police, Corporal Shoichi Shimada was killed. His death was a heavy blow to the remaining soldiers, but it also reinforced their belief in the ongoing conflict. To Onoda and Private First Class Kenshichi Kozuka, Shimada's death was proof that the enemy was still actively hunting them, and that their mission remained as critical as ever. Life in the jungle was one of constant vigilance and survival. Onoda and his companions became experts in living off the land. They foraged for native fruits and vegetables, set traps for wild boars, and occasionally stole crops and livestock from local farms. They became adept at evading search parties and concealing their presence. To the islanders, they were like ghosts, fleeting shadows from a war long past. But to Onoda and his men, every villager was a potential enemy, every search party a new threat to be outwitted. The outside world had not forgotten Onoda and his companions. Over the years, numerous attempts were made to convince the holdouts that the war was over. Search parties were sent into the jungle, leaflets were dropped from aircraft, and newspapers were left in areas where the soldiers were known to operate. In 1959, Onoda'S family even recorded messages that were broadcast into the jungle, pleading with him to come home. But to Onoda, these were all elaborate enemy tricks. Each attempt to reach him only reinforced his belief that the war was still raging and that his mission remained of utmost importance. The leaflets were dismissed as propaganda, the newspapers as forgeries, and even the familiar voices of his family were interpreted as clever imitations designed to lure him into a trap. This absolute conviction in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary speaks to the power of indoctrination and the strength of Onoda'S dedication to his duty. It also highlights the psychological impact of prolonged isolation. Cut off from all outside information, Onoda and his companions created their own reality, one in which their actions were not only justified but crucial to Japan's war effort. As the years turned into decades, the legend of the Japanese holdouts grew. They became something of a myth on Lubang Island, ghost-like figures that would emerge in the jungle to raid farms before vanishing back into the wilderness. Local authorities made repeated attempts to find and convince the soldiers to surrender, but Onoda and his men were skilled in evasion and bushcraft. They knew the jungle better than anyone and used this knowledge to remain hidden. In 1972, tragedy struck again. During an encounter with Filipino troops, Private First Class Kenshichi Kozuka was killed, leaving Onoda as the sole survivor of the original group. Now alone, Onoda'S resolve only strengthened. He saw Kozuka's death as further proof of the ongoing war and redoubled his efforts to carry out his mission. For 2 more years, Onoda continued his solitary war. He maintained his daily routines of patrolling, gathering intelligence, and surviving in the jungle. His uniform, patched and repatched countless times, had become a second skin. His rifle, meticulously maintained despite the humid conditions, was never far from his reach. In his mind, he was still a soldier of the Imperial Japanese Army, carrying out his duty as he had sworn to do nearly 3 decades earlier. The turning point in Onoda'S extraordinary story came in February 1974. A young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki ventured into the jungles of Lubang with the express purpose of finding Onoda. Suzuki, inspired by the legend of the holdout soldier, had left Japan with 3 goals: to find Lieutenant Onoda, to see a panda, and to spot the abominable snowman. In that order, against all odds, Suzuki succeeded in his first goal. Deep in the jungle, he encountered Onoda. The meeting was tense and filled with suspicion. Onoda, trained to be wary of tricks and deception, initially treated Suzuki as a potential enemy. But the young adventurer's persistence, his knowledge of Japanese culture, and his genuine desire to understand Onoda'S story slowly began to break through the soldier's defenses. Over several days, Suzuki camped with Onoda, gradually earning his trust. He shared stories of modern Japan, showed him photographs, and tried to convince him that the war had long since ended. But even faced with this young man from his homeland, Onoda'S training and sense of duty held firm. He refused to surrender, insisting that he would only lay down his arms if ordered to do so by his superior officer. This seemingly impossible demand could have been the end of the story. But Suzuki, determined to help Onoda, returned to Japan with photographs and proof of his encounter. His story made headlines and caught the attention of the Japanese government. As we approach the climax of this incredible story, remember to subscribe to our channel. The conclusion of Onoda'S journey is a testament to the power of duty, the cost of isolation, and the complexity of human nature. You won't want to miss our future episodes, exploring other fascinating chapters of history. In a twist that seems almost too extraordinary to be true, the Japanese government managed to locate Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, the man who had given Onoda his last orders in 1944. Taniguchi, now a bookseller in his 70s, agreed to travel to Lubang Island for a rendezvous that would bridge a gap of 29 years. On March 9, 1974, in a clearing in the jungle of Lubang, two men faced each other in a scene that defied the usual flow of time. Major Taniguchi, now an old man with graying hair and lined face, stood before his subordinate, who had followed his orders far beyond any reasonable expectation. Onoda, still in his patched uniform, snapped to attention, his posture as straight and disciplined as it had been nearly 3 decades earlier. With a mixture of pride and sorrow, Taniguchi read out the official orders, relieving Onoda of his duty. The words echoed in the clearing, heavy with the weight of nearly 30 years of isolation, dedication, and unimaginable perseverance. In accordance with the Imperial Command, the 14th Area Army has ceased all combat activity. In accordance with Military Headquarters Command No. A. 2003, the Special Squadron of Staff's Office is relieved of all military duties. Units and individuals under the command of Special Squadron are to cease military activities and operations immediately and place themselves under the command of the nearest superior officer. When no officer can be found, they are to communicate with the American or Philippine forces and follow their directives. The moment was profound and charged with emotion. Onoda, standing at rigid attention, listened as the words he had waited nearly 3 decades to hear were finally spoken. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he realized that his war, his mission, his entire purpose for the past 29 years, had come to an end. In that clearing, Hiroo Onoda formally surrendered. He handed over his sword, his still-functioning Arisaka Type 99 rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, and several hand grenades. He also surrendered something deeply personal: the dagger his mother had given him in 1944 with instructions to use it to take his own life if he was ever captured. True to his promise, he had never used it. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. For nearly 30 years, Onoda had lived a life defined by his mission and his unswerving belief in his duty to the Emperor and to Japan. He had endured hardships that would have broken most men, sustained only by his conviction and his loyalty. And now, in the span of a few minutes, the world as he had known it for half his life had been completely upended. Onoda'S return to Japan was met with a hero's welcome, but also with profound culture shock. The world he had left behind in 1944 was gone, replaced by a Japan he could scarcely recognize. The devastated, war-torn nation he remembered had transformed into an economic powerhouse. Tokyo, which he last saw as a city bracing for American bombs, was now a sprawling metropolis of skyscrapers and neon lights. The technology and social changes of the past 3 decades were overwhelming for Onoda. Cars were sleeker and faster, televisions were in color, and people dressed in ways he found shockingly informal. The subservient role of women in pre-war Japanese society had given way to greater equality and freedom. Even the Japanese language had evolved, with new words and phrases that were foreign to him. Onoda'S story became a media sensation, both in Japan and around the world. He was seen as a symbol of the samurai spirit of absolute loyalty and unwavering dedication to duty. Many Japanese, grappling with the rapid changes of the post-war era, saw in Onoda a connection to their past and to traditional values that some felt were being lost. However, the reaction to Onoda'S return was not universally positive. In the Philippines, particularly on Lubang Island, his reappearance dredged up painful memories. During his years in hiding, Onoda and his companions had carried out guerrilla activities that resulted in the deaths of at least 30 Filipino civilians. While he was officially pardoned by Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, many locals found it difficult to reconcile the celebration of Onoda with the suffering his actions had caused. This complexity, the tension between seeing Onoda as a hero or as a tragic figure unable to accept reality, is at the heart of why his story continues to fascinate us. It raises profound questions about the nature of duty, the power of indoctrination, and the human capacity for both incredible resilience and self-delusion. Onoda'S tale is more than just a curiosity of history. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of war, extending far beyond the official dates in history books. It highlights the power of indoctrination and the extreme lengths to which duty and loyalty can drive us. It raises questions about the nature of reality itself, the malleability of truth, and the consequences of unwavering belief in the face of a changing world. In the years following his return, Onoda struggled to adapt to modern Japan. The skills that had kept him alive in the jungles of Lubang, hypervigilance, distrust of others, self-reliance, were ill-suited to civilian life in a peaceful, technologically advanced society. He found the materialism and seeming lack of discipline in contemporary Japanese society disturbing and difficult to understand. Unable to fully adjust, Onoda eventually left Japan in 1975 and moved to Brazil, where he became a cattle rancher. The wide-open spaces and simpler lifestyle were more comfortable for him than the crowded cities of Japan. In Brazil, he married and spent much of his time writing and giving lectures about his experiences. Despite the challenges of reintegration, Onoda'S story had a profound impact on Japanese society. He became a subject of endless fascination with books, documentaries, and even films made about his life. His memoir, No Surrender, My 30-Year War, became a bestseller, offering insights into his extraordinary experience and mindset. Onoda'S unwavering dedication also sparked philosophical debates about the nature of duty and the potential dangers of unquestioning obedience. While many admired his loyalty, others saw in his story a cautionary tale about the perils of blind adherence to orders and the importance of critical thinking. In his later years, Onoda returned to Japan and established a nature camp for young people, where he taught survival skills and what he saw as traditional Japanese values. He saw this as his new mission, to help shape a generation of Japanese youth who he felt had become soft and had lost touch with the discipline and dedication he believed were crucial to Japan's spirit. Hiroo Onoda passed away in Tokyo on January 16, 2014, at the age of 91. His death marked the end of an era, closing a chapter of history that had stretched far beyond its expected conclusion. To the end of his days, Onoda maintained that he had no regrets about his 30-year war, stating that he was proud of his loyalty and commitment to his duty. As we reflect on Onoda'S extraordinary journey, we're reminded of the complexities of human nature, the lasting impacts of war, and the sometimes blurry line between dedication and delusion. His story continues to fascinate and perplex us, a reminder of the unexpected ways in which history can echo through time, shaping individual lives in profound and sometimes tragic ways. In the end, Hiroo Onoda'S tale is not just about a soldier who refused to surrender. It's about the power of belief, the weight of duty, and the resilience of the human spirit. It's a story that challenges us to question our own beliefs, to consider the cost of unwavering dedication, and to recognize the importance of adapting to a changing world. Onoda'S life serves as a powerful reminder of the long shadows cast by war, reaching far beyond the official declarations of peace to touch individual lives in ways we might never expect. It underscores the importance of clear communication, the need for critical thinking even in the face of deeply held beliefs, and the challenges of reintegrating soldiers after conflict. As we close this extraordinary chapter of history, we're left with a mix of admiration for Onoda'S tenacity and sorrow for the years he lost. Yet, to truly understand the magnitude of his experience, we must delve deeper into those 29 years in the jungles of Lubang Island. Onoda'S life during those 3 decades was a daily struggle for survival, punctuated by moments of intense danger and long periods of isolation. The dense jungle became his home, its rhythms and dangers as familiar to him as the streets of his hometown had once been. Each day began before dawn, with Onoda'S rising from his carefully concealed sleeping spot, always alert for any signs of enemy activity. His daily routine was a testament to his military training and his incredible adaptability. Mornings were often spent foraging for food, wild fruits, roots, and occasionally small animals that he could trap or hunt. He became an expert in identifying edible plants and understanding the behaviors of the island's wildlife. This knowledge was crucial not just for sustenance, but also for avoiding poisonous flora and dangerous fauna. Water was always a concern. While the tropical climate ensured frequent rainfall, Onoda'S had to be careful about waterborne diseases. He developed techniques for collecting and purifying rainwater, skills that kept him alive through countless seasons. Much of Onoda'S' day was devoted to what he saw as his military duties. He would conduct patrols of his territory, always on the lookout for enemy movements or signs of Japanese forces that might have landed on the island. He meticulously mapped the terrain, noting changes and potential strategic locations. In his mind, this information would be crucial when Japanese reinforcements finally arrived. The maintenance of his equipment was another critical daily task. Despite the humid conditions that threatened to rust and decay everything, Onoda'S kept his rifle in immaculate condition. He cleaned it daily, carefully rationing his supply of gun oil. His uniform, threadbare as it became, was regularly patched and mended. These routines were not just practical necessities. They were rituals that connected him to his identity as a soldier and to the military structure that had shaped him. Nights were perhaps the most challenging. In the darkness, every sound became a potential threat. Onoda'S rarely allowed himself more than a few hours of light sleep, always ready to wake at the slightest disturbance. The jungle nights were long, filled with the calls of unfamiliar animals and the constant drone of insects. It was during these hours that loneliness and doubt might have crept in for a lesser man. But Onoda'S' unwavering belief in his mission sustained him. The changing seasons brought their own challenges. The monsoon season turned the jungle into a sodden, muddy quagmire. Floods were a constant threat, and keeping equipment and supplies dry was a never-ending battle. In contrast, the dry season brought its own risks, with increased danger of forest fires and greater scarcity of water and game. Onoda'S' interactions with the local population were fraught with danger and misunderstanding. To him, every villager was a potential enemy collaborator. The occasional raids he conducted on local farms for supplies were, in his mind, legitimate military operations. He saw the farmers' attempts to protect their livestock and crops as enemy action, further confirming his belief that the war was ongoing. These raids, however, had real and tragic consequences for the islanders. Over the years, Onoda'S and his companions were responsible for several deaths and injuries among the local population. These actions would later become a source of controversy and pain, complicating the narrative of Onoda'S as a hero. The psychological toll of such prolonged isolation and constant vigilance is almost impossible to fathom. Onoda'S' mind, shaped by his military training and his unwavering belief in his mission, created a reality that allowed him to endure. Every leaflet dropped by search parties, every newspaper left in the jungle, every broadcast plea from his family, all were interpreted as enemy propaganda, elaborate ruses designed to trick him into surrendering. This ability to reinterpret reality to fit his worldview was both a survival mechanism and a trap. It allowed him to maintain his sense of purpose and duty in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But it also kept him locked in a war that had long since ended. separated from his family and the life he could have had. The loss of his companions over the years was perhaps the heaviest burden Onoda carried. The surrender of Yuichi Akatsu in 1950 was a blow, but one that Onoda and the others rationalized as a clever enemy trick. The death of Corporal Shoichi Shimada in 1954 was harder to bear. Onoda and Private Kozuka buried their comrade with full military honors. Their small ceremony a poignant reminder of their isolation and the risks they faced. For the next 18 years, Onoda and Kozuka continued their mission together. They developed a close bond, relying on each other for survival and maintaining each other's morale. They would spend hours discussing their plans for when Japanese reinforcements arrived, never losing faith in their ultimate victory. The death of Kozuka in 1972 was a turning point for Onoda. Suddenly alone, he faced the full weight of his isolation. Yet even this tragedy did not shake his resolve. Instead, it seemed to strengthen his determination to carry out his mission, now not just for Japan, but in honor of his fallen comrades. The 2 years Onoda'S spent alone in the jungle, from 1972 to 1974, were perhaps the most challenging of all, with no one to talk to, no one to share the burden of vigilance. He had only his sense of duty to sustain him. He continued his daily routines, maintained his equipment, and waited for the reinforcements he was certain would come. During these years, Onoda'S skills as a survivor reached their peak. He could move through the jungle like a ghost, leaving no trace of his passage. He could find food and water in the most inhospitable terrain. He could read the jungle's signs like a book, aware of every change in his environment. When Norio Suzuki found him in 1974, Onoda was a man out of time. His body was lean and weathered, his uniform a patchwork of repairs. But his mind was still that of the young officer who had been given his orders 3 decades earlier. The meeting with Suzuki and later with his former commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, was a collision between two worlds. The world of 1944 that Onoda had preserved in his mind, and the modern world of 1974. Onoda'S return to Japan was a cultural shock of immense proportions. The country he had left was a militaristic empire, confident in its divine right to rule Asia. The country he returned to was a pacifist democracy, an economic powerhouse focused on technology and trade. The contrast could not have been more stark. In many ways, Onoda'S experience after his return was as challenging as his years in the jungle. He struggled to adapt to a society that seemed to have left behind the values he had clung to for so long. The discipline, self-sacrifice, and unquestioning loyalty that had defined his life seemed out of place in modern Japan. Yet, Onoda'S story also resonated with many Japanese who felt that something had been lost in their country's rapid modernization. His dedication and spirit spoke to a past that, while problematic in many ways, still held a romantic appeal for some. He became a reluctant symbol, a living link to a history that Japan was still struggling to come to terms with. Onoda'S later years, split between Brazil and Japan, were a continuous process of reconciling his past with his present. He never fully embraced the modern world, always maintaining a critical distance from what he saw as its excesses and lack of discipline. At the same time, he found new purpose in sharing his experiences and the lessons he had learned. The nature camps he established for young people were his way of passing on what he saw as crucial values: resilience, self-reliance, and a connection to nature. While some criticize these efforts as anachronistic or even harmful, for Onoda, they were a way of giving meaning to his extraordinary experiences. As we reflect on Hiroo Onoda'S life, we are confronted with difficult questions. How do we balance duty and critical thinking? How does isolation affect our perception of reality? What is the cost of unquestioning loyalty? His story is a reminder of the complex legacy of World War II, the enduring impact of military indoctrination, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Onoda'S tale is not just a curiosity of history, but a profound human story that continues to resonate. It speaks to the power of belief, the weight of duty, and the challenges of adapting to a changing world. As we face our own uncertain times, Onoda'S life offers both inspiration and caution. a reminder of the strength that comes from dedication and the importance of remaining open to new information and changing circumstances. In the end, Hiroo Onoda'S 29-year war stands as a testament to the complexities of human nature and the long shadows cast by conflict. It challenges us to think deeply about our own beliefs and the lengths to which we might go to uphold them. As we close this chapter of history, we are left with a story that will continue to fascinate, perplex, and inspire for generations to come. Yendi.